and thanks for tuning in again to Reg with Meg. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really significant topic for the medical device industry, navigating the regulatory landscape in Mexico. Specifically, we're going to unpack the major changes Mexico's regulatory body, COFEPRIS, implemented back in 2025. Mexico is such a key market for many manufacturers. It's not one you can ignore, so understanding these changes is critical. I heard they were aimed at speeding things up.
That was the goal. They launched new abbreviated and reliance pathways for device registrations and became more flexible with good manufacturing practice or GMP evidence. COFEPRIS even committed to aggressively shorter turnaround times.
Which all sounds fantastic on paper, but I sense there's a but coming.
There is. The reality is that actual review timelines are often still much longer than the targets, and a simple mistake in your submission can lead to a request for information or a deficiency, which can be a major setback, adding months to your approval time.
So today we're essentially creating a roadmap of what not to do. We're highlighting the common submission mistakes so our listeners can avoid them.
Exactly. Let's start with the most fundamental decision a manufacturer has to make, selecting the right registration path. This is probably the biggest source of early-stage errors.
Okay, so this is about choosing between the new abbreviated pathway and the traditional standard pathway?
Correct. The new abbreviated guidelines are very appealing because they allow you to leverage approvals from other major markets, and COFEPRIS significantly expanded the list of recognized regulatory authorities, or RRAs, from just 3 to 12.
12, wow. So that includes bodies like the members of the IMDRF and participants in the Medical Device Single Audit Program, MDSAP.
Yes, exactly. So if you have approval in the US, Canada, Europe, Japan, and so on, you might think you're automatically eligible for the fast track in Mexico. But that's the trap. Approval in those markets does not guarantee eligibility.
Okay, so there are specific criteria you have to meet, even with that reference approval in hand.
Yes, and they're very strict. The first and most important is the identical product requirement. The device you submit to COFEPRIS must be, in every essential way, identical to the version authorized by your reference authority.
When you say identical, how identical do we mean? Are we talking about just the intended use and core technology?
It's much deeper than that. All essential characteristics, all components, the intended use and performance data must match the approved device precisely. All the supporting quality, safety, and performance data has to correspond exactly to the reference submission.
Okay, that's incredibly specific.
It is, and here's where companies get caught. The abbreviated pathway cannot be used if there are any changes to manufacturing sites, quality attributes, or even the primary packaging. So if you changed your polymer supplier for a handle, even if it's functionally equivalent, that could technically disqualify you.
Wow, that level of detail is a minefield. What's the next criteria?
Next up is authorization validity. Your reference authorization must have been granted within the past 5 years. They aren't interested in leveraging a decade-old approval.
That makes sense. They want recent data and evidence. What about the device's track record?
That's the third point, safety status. The applicant has to formally declare that the device has not been subject to any safety alerts or warnings from any national authority or the World Health Organization, and critically, that it hasn't been withdrawn from any market for safety or efficacy reasons.
A clean bill of health, essentially.
Exactly. And the final hurdle is about the approval type. Eligibility is limited to devices approved through a standard regulatory review. This is key. Devices that got their reference authorization through an emergency pathway, a judicial order, or any kind of conditional or accelerated approval are not eligible.
So something like an emergency use authorization wouldn't count. Why is that?
Because those approvals are often granted with a different risk-benefit calculation, and sometimes with less comprehensive data than a standard review would require. COFEPRIS wants to rely on an approval that was the result of a full, robust, peacetime review process. If you don't meet every single one of these criteria, you must use the standard registration pathway, which means a full COFEPRIS review.
And that just underscores how vital it is to get that initial pathway selection right. Okay, so once you've chosen the correct pathway, what's the next big hurdle where people make mistakes?
This brings us to our second major topic, unverifiable or non-compliant GMP and quality management system evidence. It's all about proving your manufacturing quality, and the devil is truly in the details of the documentation.
Right. So COFEPRIS made things a bit easier by recognizing certain quality system evidence as being equivalent to a GMP certificate, meaning you don't need a separate inspection.
Correct. They accept an MDSAP audit certificate, which is aligned with ISO 13485. They also accept a standalone ISO 13485 2016 certification, as long as it's from an accredited body. A CE mark certificate from the EU or a free sale certificate that explicitly declares GMP compliance are also on the list.
That seems like a good range of options. If you have one of those, where does the process go wrong for manufacturers?
It goes wrong in the authentication process. COFEPRIS issued a decree formalizing the guidelines for how you must present this proof so the reviewers can easily authenticate it. Let's break down the rules, starting with physical documents.
Okay, the hard copies.
Any physical document must either be the original or a certified copy. If the document originates from outside Mexico, it must be apostilled or legalized in its country of origin. This is a formal process that verifies the authenticity of the document for international use.
That apostille process can be time-consuming. What about language?
The documents themselves must be in Spanish or English. If they are in any other language, a certified translator must prepare a full translation. No exceptions.
Got it. Now, what about electronic documents? That must be more common and hopefully simpler.
It is, and there's good news and bad news. The good news is that electronically issued documents do not require an apostille. The bad news is that the burden of proof is on you to make verification seamless for COFEPRIS. You must provide the detailed access path, the full URL, to the official site where the document can be verified.
And what if that database or site is behind a password-protected portal?
Then you are required to provide the corresponding username and password in your submission.
Wow, you actually have to hand over login credentials? That might raise some security concerns for companies.
It does, but it's non-negotiable. And if for any reason COFEPRIS is unable to verify the authenticity of the document electronically, maybe the URL is down for maintenance when they check, or the login doesn't work, the application can be stopped. You may then be required to present the original physical document or a certified copy in person, which means all those rules for physical documents suddenly apply.
So you could be set back weeks just because of a dead link. That's a huge risk. This leads us perfectly into the complexities of the supply chain. What happens when manufacturing isn't done in-house?
That's our third key area of mistakes: confusion over manufacturer identities. Outsourcing manufacturing, assembly, or material sourcing is extremely common, but the relationship architecture must be perfectly illustrated in your submission. COFEPRIS has established very clear definitions for the legal manufacturer and the real manufacturer. Okay, let's define those terms. What's the difference? The legal manufacturer is the entity ultimately responsible for the device. They're on the hook for its safety, performance, quality, and regulatory compliance, even if they outsource 100% of the production. The real manufacturer is the entity that physically manufactures or assembles the device. This might be a subsidiary or a third-party contract manufacturer operating under a quality agreement or a maquila agreement with that real manufacturer.
And any confusion or inconsistency between these two roles in the paperwork is a problem.
A huge problem. Any discrepancy regarding the manufacturer's identities can trigger a deficiency, and this extends all the way to the device labeling. This is a very common mistake.
Can you give us an example of how that plays out on the label?
Certainly. Mexican labeling standards require the name of the legal manufacturer and the device's country of origin to appear on the label. Let's say your legal manufacturer is based in Germany, but the device is actually assembled by a contractor in Vietnam. The country of origin on the label must be Vietnam. If your label says made in Germany, that's an immediate deficiency because the real manufacturing took place elsewhere.
That's a critical distinction. So how do you make this relationship clear in the submission itself?
The distinction must be clearly established and consistent throughout the entire filing. Legal manufacturers often need to include a formal explanatory letter that outlines its relationships with all suppliers, including real or contract manufacturers. And in the case of contract manufacturing, you must also include your quality agreement or maquila agreement with that real manufacturer.
And I assume this ties back into the GMP evidence and pathway selection we already talked about.
It absolutely does. The QMS evidence or certificates you provide must confirm the QMS compliance of the specific manufacturing sites. And to bring it full circle, that manufacturing site must match the site in your reference market documentation if you want to use the abbreviated pathway. Even if you have a perfect, verifiable GMP certificate for your new real manufacturer in Vietnam, if your FDA approval was for a site in Germany, you cannot use the abbreviated pathway.
It's all a connected web of details. One change has a ripple effect across the entire submission. Okay, let's move on to the final area of common mistakes for today.
The last one is language, and it's specifically about the labeling and instructions for use, or IFU.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the main submission documents can be in English or Spanish.
That's correct, which is a big help. However, any materials intended for the end user in Mexico, namely the IFU and the label itself, must be provided in Spanish.
That seems logical for the Mexican market. Where's the pitfall here? Is it just about bad translations?
It's about more than just a simple translation. The mistake is treating the Spanish IFU as a simple administrative task, rather than as an extension of your core device dossier. The IFU must perfectly match the approved labeling and device specifications. Any mismatches can trigger deficiencies.
Because inconsistent terminology could imply different operating conditions or warnings?
Exactly. Inaccuracies or omissions, even if they seem minor and can be attributed to translation nuance, can be interpreted by a COFEPRIS reviewer as a potential safety risk. If the Spanish term for a warning in your IFU doesn't align perfectly with the terminology used in your technical dossier, it raises questions about intended use and safety measures.
This is why using a specialized medical device translator, someone who understands the regulatory context, is so important, rather than a generic translation service.
Absolutely critical. Think about a term like sterile versus aseptic. A lay translator might use them interchangeably, but in a regulatory context, they have vastly different meanings and implications. Getting that wrong can stall an entire submission.
So, to summarize everything we've discussed, it sounds like while COFEPRIS's updated framework does offer real opportunities for faster market access, it's a path that demands incredible precision. That makes perfect sense. And this highlights a broader theme. Compliance doesn't end once you get the registration. The product's entire life cycle is under scrutiny.
That's the perfect way to put it. The 2025 reforms are meaningful steps forward, but they introduce new criteria and documentation requirements that leave plenty of room for error. The good news is that these mistakes are all avoidable.
And it comes down to a thorough pre-submission review. Let's quickly recap the key areas to check.
First, rigorously check your pathway eligibility against all 4 criteria. Second, ensure your manufacturer identity, both legal and real, is perfectly aligned and documented across your entire submission, including labeling. Third, make sure your GMP documentation is authenticated exactly as COFEPRIS requires, whether physical or electronic. And fourth, treat your Spanish IFU and labeling with the same level of scrutiny as your core technical data.
Also, diligence can be the difference between a smooth approval and months of frustrating back and forth. For companies that feel overwhelmed by this, seeking outside expertise can be a smart move.
Without a doubt, partnering with an experienced Mexico registration holder like MedEnvoy Global or a regulatory consultancy that lives and breathes these rules can help ensure a submission is compliant from day one, ultimately saving a huge amount of time and resources.
Excellent insights. That's all the time we have for today on this deep dive.
Until next time, stay informed and stay compliant. Bye, guys.